They are the movers and the shakers, the dreamers and the doers, teachers, athletes, musicians, activists, entrepreneurs. They are the men and women that have made and continue to make Huntington Beach such a special place. I'm Chris Epting, and these are the legendary locals. Ralph and Charlene Bauer came to Huntington Beach in 1964 with their children Eric and Elaine. Ralph immediately jumped into public service, joining the newly constituted Personnel Board in 1965. He served on City Council from 1992 to 2002, aiding in a variety of projects, but he remains most proud of his work with Shirley Detloff to create the Human Relations Task Force and the Declaration of Policy about Human Dignity. Ralph was named Citizen of the Year in 2004. Charlene co-founded the Friends of the Library in 1971 as a nonprofit organization to help raise funds to purchase items and books not in the library's budget. The couple have done a lot for Huntington Beach. In their beautiful Huntington Harbor home, we learned a lot more about them. First of all, Bowers, I want to wish you, an early congratulations. You have a wedding anniversary coming up in a number of months. What number is it?
70.
70 in this June. Married 70 years.
June 25th.
June 25th. I mean, that alone would warrant an episode that we could do, I'm sure. Just how do you make a marriage last that long? So early congratulations from everybody, I'm sure, watching on that.
Thank you.
But going back a little bit, both of your histories in Huntington Beach together, collectively and independent, have been profound and have really helped shape the community. You met each other in about 1949, right?
Right.
First date.
First date, 1949.
First date, October 1st, 1949.
Eventually, you make it to Huntington Beach in the early 1960s. But before that, there were a lot of interesting things happening. Ralph, you were telling me earlier, you played on John Wooden's very first team at UCLA on the basketball team.
Right.
What do you remember about that? Because Wooden went on to become, obviously, the most vaunted coach in history. But what do you remember in his first year?
First of all, he tended to be like your father in a very stern way, in the old-fashioned way. And he had an ability to recognize talent, and his teams never always played the five best players. He played the best players that played together well. Huh. And the major thing I learned from Coach was team play. And that's it. And I'll tell you, the people came from all kinds of background, ethnicities, races, and what have you, and they all loved the guy. And he was stern, fair, objective, and I can remember we played USC freshmen at the Olympic Auditorium in 1948, and we lost. And the first game we lost, and we won 18 straight games. And the coach came over and says, "This is what you did wrong." And we played him the next night at the UCLA gym, and we beat him. And we did exactly what Coach told us. And we said, boy, oh boy, that guy really knows what he's doing.
A little local connection. I remember I was coaching at St. Bonaventure years ago, and his grandson was there playing, because I guess his daughter lives in Huntington Beach, or lived in Huntington Beach.
He went to Ocean Bay High School.
Yeah. And so the nice local connection. And then you make it here in the early 1960s. Ralph, you were a chemistry student, right?
Right.
But in Huntington Beach, what do you remember? You used to come here when you were a teenager, right? Before you moved here, you would come here like in the 40s, right?
Yeah, in the 40s.
What was it like back then? What do you remember?
Well, it was all the pictures you see of the wall-to-wall oil wells, they were all there. And so Huntington Beach looked kind of like a dumpy place, but when you're a kid, you don't care. And you go down to the pier and you surf the pier.
Were you here then as well, Charlene? Did you ever come to Huntington?
I came once when it was Tin Can Beach, camping with my mother and her family.
So you did that?
I did that.
And with the cans on the beach and everything?
Oh, yeah. Well, there was also a railroad that went from here to Newport Beach. So
you remember seeing the trains?
Oh, yeah.
The red car. You saw those. You rode those.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Those are things that today people, it's a long time ago. Everything is in the past tense, but to find people that actually experience them is rare. So you rode those train cars. You saw Huntington Beach in the 40s. You mentioned you saw the Bolsa Chica gun club and everything when it was still there. But you don't move here until the early 60s. How does that happen?
Well, I wanted to live close to the ocean. When I was a kid, we lived in Hollywood, and we went to the beach about 3 times a year, and it was a big event. So I said, someday I'm going to live at the beach. So we came looking for a house, and I started up in by LAX, looking for houses close to the beach. And the farther south I got, the cheaper they got. I finally got down to Huntington Beach, and I could afford the house here, and I'm close to the beach. That's how it happened.
And this was right when Huntington Harbor was in its infant stages, right? It's a year or two old.
It was about 2 years old at that time. So.
And you've been here in the harbor ever since
Ever
then.
since, yeah.
Since you got to Huntington, I mean, I don't even know where to start between, you know, school boards, mayor, city council, the library. One thing I do want to talk a little bit about, though, is the environmental aspect of the wetlands and what it was like to be involved in helping to protect and preserve the wetlands. What do you remember about that fight and what the challenges were?
Well, the Amigos de Bolsa Chica was started by, I think the first meeting there was about a half a dozen of us at the house over there on Rhoda Martin, Rhoda and Ken Martin sort of started it, and there were about 6 or 7 of us in their living room, and the League of Women Voters had studied it,
Right.
and the League of Women Voters said, gee, why don't we try and save it? And we did a little research on the ownership, and the ownership was in doubt, and we knew that because the owner could not get any insurance, any ownership insurance. So we knew it was doubtful that they owned it. But they were there, and it was theirs. And at that time, Huntington Harbor Corporation wanted to extend it and went to the then owner and asked if they would join up with them. They didn't want to do it. So time went on, and the League of Women Voters basically started the Amigos de Bolsa Chica, and said, let's save it, and went on and on and on. And initially, the then city council really wasn't very supportive. In fact, the majority was against it, and the first person elected was Peter Green, who really pushed it pretty hard, and then they finally ended up with more environmentally oriented kinds of people and said, gee, wouldn't it be safe? And the real issue was it's the largest wetlands of its kind in Southern California, and that's why.
Flyway.
And the environmentalists, which I wasn't necessarily at the time, convinced us that it would be a good thing to save. And you say, gee, that's neat. And we talked about the Pacific Flyway and all this sort of thing. So that's how it got started.
What do you think when you see it today, knowing what you went through almost 60 years ago when it started, when you see it today, knowing all the work that went into it?
I drive it maybe sometimes 2 and 3 times a day, and I love it every single time. I think about it every single time. Because driving south and north, you get a different view, and you see nature. You're communing with nature. The Pacific Ocean on one side, the Bolsa Chica on the other side, and we're in a sort of a semi-urban type environment, but you can escape from the harsh realities of urban living by just driving from here to downtown Huntington Beach. And I've been told, I don't know if it's true or not, that Huntington Beach has the longest stretch of uninhibited access to the beach of any city in California.
That's true.
And especially since they got the Surfside, and it makes it a very special place.
It takes a village. Nobody does anything alone. Everything takes a village, and it takes a lot of patience. The Bolsa Chica is a prime example. And Rhoda Martin started first because we didn't get any tax from the oil islands. Mm-hmm. And Long Beach was getting it and building those islands and so forth. And she was a little bulldog, and she wanted that. And then it kind of, well, what about across the highway? And the League of Women Voters at that time was about 200 members. And they all jumped on board, and then the husbands jumped on board, and there were all kinds of committees.
Well, you were also partially, you yourself, of another very important thing in this city for those of us that love the library, the Central Park Library. The Friends of the Library is something that you were a part of creating. Talk about that, how that happened and what the backdrop was.
Well, actually the theater group had a few acres, and when we came to town, the only intellectual thing was the theater and the barn. And
the Playhouse over by Yorktown in Maine.
Right. And they had a few acres in what is now Central Park. And so then we started talking about the library because all we had was downtown, which was too small. It was nicely run, but it was too small. And so they had the acreage, and so now they needed a building, and they decided to have architects interview architects, and I suggested that they interview Neutra.
Well, let me
Richard
just
Neutra.
interject here. There was a city council meeting, and they decided to build a library, and they had the money to build it. And so they began talking about architects. A lot of architects applied, and one of them was Richard Neutra. So Charlene is in the audience at public comment, gets up, oh yes, and she studied about this at UCLA, and she says, oh, what about Richard Neutra? And none of the council members were familiar with it, and they looked at each other and says, gee, she gave a pitch for Richard Neutra. They looked at each other and says, hey, let's hire Richard Neutra. And that's how it happened. So the point being, here's someone in the audience gets up with knowledge and talks to him,
Makes
and the
a
council was
difference.
responsive. And we got to know Richard, and he passed away before the building was built, and then the son took
His
over,
son, right.
Dion, and we got to know Dion pretty well. And but it was Richard's vision to put it where it was because there was a lake right there at
Right.
that time.
He loved
And
the water.
and then his idea was, of course, to put the stacks in the center and let's build a library around the stacks. So it was kind of Richard Neutra's last design,
Hurrah.
basically.
Well, the Friends of the Library still goes on today as an organization. What were you originally thinking when that came together, Charlene? What was the idea?
Mostly we worried about filling it. And so there were committees to raise money for books. And of course they had to be library bound. It wasn't just going to be donations from your shelves upstairs or something.
In fact, we get a big kick out of going in the library, watching a mom come out with a couple of kids and an armful of books. And I said, man, oh man, that changed that person's life. They read a book. So.
Ralph, what can you tell me about this? Moving from the library now, you as a chemist and a chemistry student have been involved in some very instrumental, profoundly significant things. You took this out to show us. Why don't you explain for everybody what this model is and what it represents?
I started at UCLA. I'd been in the service and spent 2 years in the Korean War and 2 winters in North Korea. I was on a minesweeper. And I got out of the service and I thought, well, I'm going to go back to graduate school. So my wife was graduated by then. I got a job so I could go to school. So I went back and chose as a research director a fellow named Don Cram, who was a young go-getter. And I said, boy, I need to work for a go-getter. So he gave me a molecule called the 2,2-paracyclophane, which I won't bother to explain. But it's a cyclic compound that has certain density of electrons. And you make compounds with it called pi complexes. And the pi complexes are attracted by the electrons and make literally a sandwich. But it's a cyclic compound, there's a hole in the middle. So the question became, what happens if the hole gets big enough? Can a molecule be inside the hole? And what that does is mimics enzymes. That's what enzymes do. Enzymes have an internal shape, and they catalyze reactions in your body, and they do it in such a way because of the shape, the molecules fit into that hole and then react with each other more rapidly than they would if it just hit at random. So we thought, well, let's long-term build a molecule that has a big hole in it and that molecules inside. Well, it took them a long time. After I left 20 years to finally get to where he needed to go, and he won the Nobel Prize in 1987.
And so he gave you then this model to commemorate your...
He wrote on it...
based on the 1958 doctoral research on complexation by Ralph H. Bauer, which anticipated work leading to the 1987 Nobel Prize. It's amazing. Who knew?
And I was very lucky. But I had the idea, and it led to the Nobel Prize.
Well, listen, Ralph and Charlene, we could do this, and maybe we will do this again. It's never enough time. We only start to scratch the surface. But with that, I want to thank you for your contributions to the community, for your time today on this beautiful day on your beautiful home here in the harbor. It's good to catch up with you like this.
Well, it's a ho hum, another day in paradise.
You are both true legendary locals.